Okay. About that time. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be back at Four Lakes Church Christ. Good to hear so much fellowship happening even before class. Oh, that is. That is okay, though. It is always good to be drowned out by the voices here, gathering together as the Lord's church. So I will not complain as long as it eventually settles down. That's the goal. That's the goal. We don't need to about face in a military fashion and all sit down at once. We can find our seats, but it is good to be back in front of y'all. Thank Aaron Grody for covering for me last week. I believe y'all covered the end of the Peter study of Peter and his denial, so I thank him for taking up that class and getting that done. But yeah, as we continue through our book here, it just, as I'm reading through this, we came back, we were gone to Arizona for a wedding last weekend, and the day after it hit 100 degrees. And that day I flew in from 100 degrees and got back to 54. And it's like, yes, I'm back in Wisconsin. But apparently fall came while we were gone over the weekend, because it was 70s up until then. So we came back and it's like, I guess fall's here. Everything's red and yellow and it's beautiful and stuff. So that's been honestly very good. It felt like coming home to the chill. So good to be back in Wisconsin. So good. As we continue our study here, we're now moving on to the next two apostles that we usually hear after Peter and Andrew, and that's James and John, or John and James as the book says. But we're going to be starting off this morning in Mark chapter 1. So if you want to be turning over to there, we're going to see a lot of different aspects. Kind of a similar context with James and John, also fishermen, as we're going to read here. But the calling is of a similar fashion, but some things that we're going to kind of differentiate this morning with James and John are, we're going to kind of look into the idea of Christian growth, specifically kind of how James and John start versus where they end, and kind of those in between. So first off, let's just read the story of how James and John end up apostles, or how they come to be following Jesus. So if someone wants to read from Mark 1, if they want to read verses 18 through 20.
And straightway they forsook their nets and followed him. And when he had gone a little further thence, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and his John, his brother, who were in the ship mending their nets. And straightway he called them, and they left with their father Zebedee in the ship with the hired servants, and went after him.
All right. So a little bit of context. Literally one verse earlier, we see that Jesus says to Simon and his brother Andrew, "Come follow me," and they immediately left their nets and came and followed him. So this was a very productive walk on the shore for Jesus. It's almost like he had lined this up in a very specific way. He knew where they were going to be, and he knew that they were going to be in close proximity, so he just kind of knocked 4 birds out with one stone walking along the shore. So first he gets Simon and Andrew, and then he comes upon James and John, who it says they were also fishing, and it says they were even fishing with their dad. So we see the example here of this being the family business. It was the dad, it was the servants, and it was the 2 sons out fishing. And so he calls to them, he says, "Come follow me," and it says in verse 18, they immediately left their nets and followed him. Again, very much in a manner of, we should be worried about these things. Like, these should be important to us. This is our livelihood. This is how we get food for our family, how we make money to buy things to support the family. And the call of Jesus is so important that they put down the nets, the tool of their trade, and go and follow Jesus. And so then, whenever he calls James and John, they were in the boat mending the nets with their dad, but as soon as he calls them, they not only just drop their nets and follow him, the dad, like the guy who taught them, who is kind of like guiding them along how they're going to become fishermen themselves, they not only leave their gear, they leave their family face to face and get up and follow Jesus. When we talk about social media and the internet, a term that often comes up is like anonymity. And anonymity, right? Yeah. The idea of you are being anonymous. Like people don't know exactly who you are. They don't know where you live. They don't know your name. They don't know anything about you. And so, not to take away from the apostles beforehand, but it was their boat. It was their nets. They were kind of doing it themselves. They didn't have kind of any hang-ups of people watching them do it. They were kind of, it was their decision. They were there like, okay, cool. No, yeah, we're going to make this decision. We're going to go and follow Jesus. Here, James and John's parent is right there. And it says immediately after Jesus called James and John, they got up and left. A fair inference would be they didn't say goodbye. They didn't talk this through with their father, who was right there. They heard the call and they went. They didn't have that anonymity of being able to kind of make that own autonomous decision without anyone there to talk them out of it. We don't know James and John's father's reaction. Maybe he had also heard about this Jesus person, and maybe he was okay with it. But he also might have had the reaction of, where are you guys going? Like, we are in the middle of catching fish. We are mending the nets for the day, and you're just going to drop this on me? We don't know that for certain, but it is something to think about. It probably was a little more difficult having someone that you have grown up with, someone that has taught you, someone you probably look up to, being right there and still dropping everything and leaving because this guy asked you to. And so then, after this, we see the rest of the apostles are called, and things start to kick off. We've got the 12 apostles, we've got Jesus performing miracles, and just 2 chapters later, if you want to turn to Mark chapter 3, we're going to see an example of we get a look into kind of the personality of James and John. So let's real quick flip over to chapter 3. And if someone wants to read verses 13 through, let's read through 17.
And he went up on the mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 so that they would be with him, and that he could send them out to preach, and to have authority to cast out the demons. And he appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, and James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder.
Boanerges, which, when translated, is literally sons of thunder. Interesting. Sons of thunder. What does thunder, what does that word bring up? What kind of visuals or what sensory things do you think of when you think of thunder?
Lightning.
Loud, yeah. Comes right after a bright flash. Is very hard to ignore. For you parents, oftentimes whenever your kids are young, whenever a thunderstorm comes in, what are you automatically expecting? Crying. An unexpected presence in your bed suddenly. I know, yeah, starting off, yeah, if there was a thunderstorm, it's confusing, it's loud, it's bright. It frazzles you. And yeah, from a young age, yeah, I would go running to my parents' room, even though they would assure me, it's just outside, there's nothing coming in. Of course, my dad thought it was hilarious to call them thunder demons, which then gave an even different visual. But that's my father's parenting style. We won't get into that right now. But the point is that yes, it's loud. It's not interrupting. It's off-putting. It's something that we grow to appreciate. But at first, starting off in life, it's confusing. But also, it's interesting that James and John receive a name from Jesus that kind of lets us see how they approach things. being called sons of thunder, we probably had James and John who were very bold, who were very in your face, who were probably very passionate about following Jesus, where gung-ho is a good term that comes to mind when thinking about the way that they follow Jesus. But I think Jesus, in giving them this name, kind of was giving them a hint of, all right, guys, like, I appreciate the energy. I appreciate y'all really going for it. But sometimes we don't need the thunder. But receiving this name gives us kind of a look into that was kind of how they approached things. Their approach was loud, was to like really get in there and start probably announcing themselves to a crowd before they arrived and all these things. And so we see here that whenever he calls these 12 together, that he gives them power to heal sickness and to cast out demons. And so what we're going to see is that as the apostles receive this power, some of them react to it in different ways. And so let's look at an example of how James and John kind of view them receiving that power. So if you want to flip over, we're now going to go to the book of Luke. And we're going to go to Luke chapter 9. We're going to go near the end of the chapter. We're going to go down to verse 51. Luke 9, verse 51, starting there. Now it came to pass, when the time had come for him to be received up, that he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face. And as they entered a village of the Samaritans to prepare for him. But the Samaritans would not receive him, because his face was set for the journey to Jerusalem. When his disciples James and John saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just as Elijah did? But he turned and rebuked them and said, You do not know the manner of spirit you are of. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went to another village. So the setup here is interesting. So Jesus is fixing to head to Jerusalem. That's kind of the end goal. And so as part of this, they have to pass through a village of Samaritans. Now, historically, what was the relationship between the Jews and the Samaritans? Not good. Oftentimes, lots of butting heads, lots of land disputes, lots of even like historical, like people's origins. They were intermingled, but they didn't want to admit it. Kind of a deal. They wanted to be hard separation. We don't deal with those Samaritans. They stay on their side. We stay on our side. Which is why the parable of the Good Samaritan is so poignant, because it's about someone that the Jews viewed as bad, as not clean, as not part of the Jews being such a good deal. That kind of tells you kind of that hard line between Jews and Samaritans. So Jesus wanting to pass through this village at all speaks tons, because as he says, Jesus did not come to specifically preach to one people. He was setting up the kingdom for everyone. But what he does is he just wants to stop in town. He wants to come into town and stay, maybe for a day, maybe for a night. But the people of the town say, no, you cannot come through here, not necessarily because he's a Jew, but because his end goal is Jerusalem. They don't even necessarily want to keep him out because he's a Jew, but anyone even traveling to Jerusalem, they don't need to know what your background is or what your people are. If you're even heading towards Jerusalem, can't stop here. Can't do it. And so what are James and John's reaction to this? Destruction. And it's interesting because here we see that James and John are at least they have read up of the prophets of the past, because they have received the power to drive out demons and heal people, and they remember those stories of Elijah catching a wet sacrifice on fire and the fire and brimstone coming down on Sodom and Gomorrah, and their first reaction, is, hey Jesus, you want us to smite these guys for you? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned driving out demons. Sometimes I've thought of it as casting
Yeah.
evil spirits out.
Yeah.
Like perhaps similar to casting spells. It might be a magical operation.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, a lot of like the way it's portrayed. Some people that didn't get the background, that didn't know of Jesus's miracles and such, yeah, might see it as magic. We remember Simon the sorcerer tries to pay the apostles for the power to drive out demons and to heal people, because he kind of had that background of, oh yeah, I do this sorcery stuff, so maybe this is just a different kind of sorcery. Maybe they can teach me how to do this other kind of sorcery. So yeah, that could very easily be kind of the conception here. But what does Jesus tell James and John when they want to call down fire and brimstone?
No, that's not how we do it.
Right. You do not know what manner of spirit you are from. He says, I gave you abilities, but did I make you judge, jury, and executioner? You're not Eli. You're not the prophets of old. I have a very different type of power that I've given you. He says, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And so they go on their way. They don't force themselves into town. Well, you guys are really missing out because this here is the Messiah of the world. They weren't received well. So there's an angry reaction. James and John, sons of thunder, they want to bring the thunder. They want to bring the loud, they want to bring the flash down on this town and show them exactly what they're missing out on. And Jesus says, no. I want my message to be heard, but there are going to be some people that just aren't going to hear it right away. And so instead of stomping over ruins, you just go around. As I said, no, go ahead.
Well, I think it's a good example of that, the fact of bringing around the New Testament and sort of things, because in the old days, they would exactly do that, but now with the disciples coming around, the point is to save people and bring people together essentially underneath, Jesus and going up through his gifts that he was given to that point. So I think it's a good thing that shows that, and my study Bible references the fact that they are the sons of thunder and they are quick to just be like, hey, do you want us to smite them versus no, they don't want to be, talk to you right now, let's go around and we'll work on other people for now instead.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good point.
Yeah. And we have to remember that James and John were not the only ones that shared this boldness. In the Garden of Gethsemane, whenever the soldiers come to arrest Jesus, what does Peter do? He cuts the guy's ear off.
Yeah.
In a moment of like quick, almost self-preservation or group preservation, yeah, he lashes out. He lashes out with violence, and Jesus puts the guy's ear back on and goes, no. Remember, that's not how we're doing things. Remember James and John. Remember the whole smiting the town business. Remember, that's not what we're on. But yeah, talking about how the difference from the New Testament to the Old Testament. What happened whenever Jericho would receive the Jews that were heading towards the Promised Land? What did they do? They marched around for a few days and then they yelled and the whole city fell over. And that was a lesson. That was the demonstration of the Lord's power. But now we're seeing the Lord's power in a different way. It's not about being conquering heroes. It's not about marching over everything in your path because you're the chosen people. Now it's teaching everyone that everyone is the chosen people. That there's no more destruction if you don't join up. It's about, we want to teach you the good news. If you won't hear it, that's okay for now. But we're not going to kill you so that you never have the chance to hear it ever. The point is patience is what pays off. Yeah.
I like that you refer to like hearing the good news. It reminds me of a Jimmy Cliff song. Have you heard the news?
Yeah.
Or have you listened to the news? Might be a more comprehensive
Yeah.
term for it.
And yeah, in this day and age, we didn't have emails, we didn't have instant messaging or more visual ways of learning news. It was entirely by word of mouth. It was maybe sometimes a letter, but that letter would take probably a couple of days to go from town to town because you had to literally run it to the next town over. But it was just people talking about it. It was a friend telling a friend, it was a family member telling a family member, and that person, when they take a trip to another town, have you heard about this guy that I've been told about? All of this was word of mouth. So yeah, if it wasn't being told to someone, they probably weren't going to hear it. So yeah, very much, yeah, listening and hearing was of such importance in this time. Very good point.
If I might elaborate on listening, I think it's a mixture of hearing and or hearkening. You know, like a lot of people maybe haven't heard the word hearken, but it means like to hear something and do according to that, or hear something and buy into it. That's listening to me, is this combination or mixture of hearing and hearkening.
Yeah, no. Makes me think of Simon and Garfunkel lyrics, Sound of Silence. People talking without speaking, people hearing without listening. You can hear something. Oftentimes, my wife will be talking to me from another room, and I'm hearing that she's saying something, but I'm not listening to what's happening. And that's something for me to work on.
That's
I feel
called
like
selective
Don't
hearing.
say that out loud.
Exactly. Exactly. But there are times where, yeah, she's like, "Hey, did you do that thing?" I'm like, "What? You never asked me to do that thing." Yeah, I said it earlier, and you said okay, and I went, But yes, no, it's that idea of you can hear something, but you're not gonna hearken to it. You're not gonna listen to it unless you're really actually taking the time to hear what is said. Yeah. So yeah, the importance of hearing, and we're going to move on a little bit for now, but there's a little bit more. I like where you're going with that. So that's kind of all of our reading for the day. But yeah, I wanted to kind of get that background of James and John, sons of thunder. As we look at their reaction to having power, to that initial kind of rush that they get of being able to do things that physically on the earth weren't possible before. At first, yeah, they want to force people. They want to push Jesus down people's throats. They want people to have to see, to have to hear exactly how powerful Jesus is. And again, that's not the point of Jesus coming down. That's not the point of Jesus being born a human God in human form. Is the way that the word was best transmitted was by word of mouth and by hearing. Not being captured and captively told about this, it was come and hear what great news I have to give to you. And James, we don't hear a whole lot of writing from in the future, but John, very much so. John writes his own gospel account. John has 3 more letters that we read of near the end of the Bible. And how has John's perception of how he carries out Jesus' will changed? Well, to really kind of embody that, I want to real quick read from the first of John's letters. Let's go to 1 John. And if you want to follow along, we're going to go to 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4. 1 John, yeah, not
John.
right, not the Gospel of John, the smaller ones at the end, yes. 1 John chapter 4, and we're going to be starting in verse 7. And if someone could, if you could just read verses 7 through 12.
Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us.
All right. So first off, do those first few verses sound familiar? Love one another, for love is of God. He who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God is love. The same guy who, when people wouldn't even let them pass through their town, wouldn't listen to Jesus, wanted to wipe the town off the face of the earth. And here he is now saying that, dear friends, since God so loved us, we all also ought to love one another. For no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Yep.
Just in this case and all throughout the New Testament, the word translated God is theos in the Koine Greek. Theos, related to theory, theologizing, perhaps even thought. But yeah, everywhere you see God, and pretty much in the New Testament, it's theos, Theos.
Yeah. But yeah, here we're looking at the same guy who wanted to smite a town off the face of the earth is now writing about the most important thing is love. Because if God, this incorporeal being that we cannot see, we cannot even, our minds cannot wrap around the full idea of God, can be summarized in the word love. Because like John says, not necessarily because we love God. He didn't send Jesus because we showered him in praise and showed him the love that he deserves. He sent Jesus because he loves us so much. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish but have life eternal. Even though he's gone through leading his chosen people, the Jews, out of Egypt into their promised land. They've had the judges, they've been conquered, they've been taken in captivity, they've come back again, they've set up the temples, they've set up idols, they've gone through all of this stuff. And even though it's been a very rocky ride, it's been back and forth, it's been loss and recovery, God never turned away from his plan. He sent Jesus into, to put it lightly, a chaotic time of the area that he's born into. The Romans are now kind of in control of everything. You know, the Jewish people still get to live in their area, they still get to practice their ways, but with this constant looming empire, making sure they pay their taxes, making sure that they go to the right places, making sure they're in the right towns, kind of micromanaging every little thing they do. There's always this hint of the Romans there. And here is Jesus in the midst of the Jews wanting to cast off their Roman oppressors, wanting someone to come in and literally kick the Romans out of their land. And here's this guy preaching about loving one another, preaching about having faith, about putting your stock into something that isn't visible, something that isn't, you can't reach out and touch it, but it's just as powerful. And here we see that Jesus had such an impact on his apostles that they go from the answer is violence, the answer is a big show of force, to the answer is loving one another. And here in John's letter, we see that he has totally flipped that coin. He is no longer the son of thunder. He is John, the apostle that Jesus loved.
And in terms of faith, a lot of people, I don't think, know that faith, archaically, was a verb, meaning believe or trust, faithing. Archaically, as in Shakespearean times.
Right. And so for our lesson today, I kind of wanted to flip it on its head. And in the study book, it starts off, the intro talks about spiritual development. And so now that we've read kind of James and John's story and how they've developed now, James and John weren't content to just be an apostle. They weren't content Actually, let me read real quick. I want to go over to Luke chapter 14, verses 26 and 27. There is a few instances, specifically it talks about James and John arguing over who's going to get to sit next to Jesus in heaven. For a while there, James and John didn't see this as, this is us spreading the word to everyone. James and John saw it as, this is a business opportunity to move up in the world, or in their case, the afterworld. So yeah, Luke chapter 14, and I want to 26 and 27. Sorry, so we'll read this after this. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Real quick, cut out that context. In Luke, in our reading here, the cost of being a disciple, this section is entitled. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father, mother, wife, and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." So now hearing that, that's a difficult verse sometimes when you initially look at it. But when we look at the examples that the apostles set, we kind of get a clear picture. When Jesus says, "He who does not hate his father and mother, his own life, his brothers and sisters," is he talking about literally like despising those people? No.
Maybe he's talking about when they get out of line, some hating certain things that are wrong is
Yeah,
appropriate.
no, you're on the right track exactly, because as we saw, James and John got up and left their father immediately. That wasn't an act of hate. That wasn't an act of aggression. But what James and John were showing was,
I was just gonna say, maybe a little bit of sibling rivalry, being around brothers all the time like I am. It's always one-upmanship,
Right.
and so, well, I'll sit on the right hand, well, no, I'll sit on the right hand,
Right. Yeah.
So,
I think the point of trying to get at is you're supposed to love Jesus more than your immediate family.
You're not supposed to let those people turn you away from what is good. Jesus isn't wanting you to strike down your brother or sister, but he wants you to be so set in your faith that if they come to you with something that's conflicting, or they come with you just concern of, hey, maybe you're getting a little too much into this religion thing, that shouldn't be, like, you have a strong bond with your family, but that shouldn't be enough to turn you towards evil. Yeah.
Well, when you don't necessarily hate the person because who they are, it's because of what they've been doing or what they think. So when you hate your father, you don't physically hate him in his body. You hate what he is doing. That's part of it.
Yeah. It's that old saying, hate the sin, not the sinner. Sometimes that's kind of used as a shield to not have to talk to people that we don't agree with. As something is like, oh, hate the sin, not the sinner, as we turn away and walk off. But no, if we think about that phrase, we're not ever supposed to turn someone away because of the life that they follow. We're not supposed to cut someone off because of what they're doing. We have to make sure that it doesn't turn us away. We have to make sure that we keep ourselves pure, ourselves like set in our faith. But if a person were to walk through that door right now, slobbering drunk, I would hope that we would offer them help. And not, what are you doing here, and kick them out the door. We would still want the person to have that healing, to have that assistance, as long as we don't let it affect us. We have to hate the sin and not the person who's in sin. Yeah.
I was just thinking of something that happened with one of my children when they were small. He had been giving me a very rough time all day long. And I don't remember what he did, but I said, I love you, but right now I don't like you. So a few days later, I gave him a hug and said, I love you. He said, but Mom, do you like me? I said, I like you, I just don't like what you're doing.
The phrase that comes to mind is, I love you too much to let you act this way. Your dislike is not for the person, it's their actions. Yeah.
I very much like that you mentioned, he was teaching not to be overly religious or have too much religiosity. There's an Arabic word that translates two ways, religion or way. It suggests to me that a religion is simply a way, and you can overdo it, you can get caught up
Yeah.
in the game, so to speak.
No, definitely. Kind of how James and John were caught up in the power of Jesus. They were feeling that power, that like all knowingness that Jesus had, but they were just kind of too focused on being, I don't know, being right, being the powerful ones, the ones having the power. And so, yeah, getting caught up in one aspect of something can lead you off the path that you were originally on. Yeah, good point.
Brought up something, just I thought something. Isn't there a religious group that calls themselves the Way?
Maybe. Yeah.
Technically, that is
Yes,
actually
I remember that too.
because it is in the Bible. That,
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus referred to it
Yeah.
as the way.
Jesus is the
There
way, the
might
truth,
be a
and life.
particular, denomination or something that calls themselves that, but that term is actually.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All throughout Acts, the church, Christianity is referred to as the way,
Hmm.
just because that's,
Yeah,
Luke coined it, so.
that's the context I remember, is that the first century Christians called their religion the Way.
Yeah. Which isn't necessarily right or wrong, because again, they're just referring to when Jesus referred to himself as the way. Then it's whenever you start having it become a name about like a label for your group, that maybe you're reading a bit too much into it. But yeah, wanting to follow the way is not capital T, capital W, is not necessarily getting distracted. It's terminology. It's all about, again, wanting to make sure that what you're following is based in Jesus' teaching. So yeah, no, very fair point. Baxter, I've seen your hand a couple times.
I'm kind of behind on this conversation. In terms of turning somebody away, what we were talking about a few minutes ago, Paul makes a distinction in 1 Corinthians 5 about outsiders and a so-called brother. And there are times when we are not even to eat with such a one. Somebody claiming to be one of us who's persisting in sinful behavior.
Yeah.
And in that context, sexual immorality, covetousness, idol worship, reviler, drunkard, swindler, and in that context, Paul says, don't even associate.
Right.
Like it is wrong.
Because you don't want it to corrupt the group. You don't want it to corrupt yourselves. Yeah, making sure they're getting their help. But if the help you're giving them is being vastly outweighed by the confusion, by the dissension that person is bringing to a group, yeah, then it's time to start making the hard decisions. Yeah.
That is kind of what I was wanting to say earlier about how correction plays into love. Because you can't claim to love somebody if you allow them to go down a path without saying anything or trying to change their ways, help them. Those two things are not together. I mean, we went through a town where every single church building had particular flags flying above, and you can welcome people in, you can accept them into the flock, but you cannot allow what they do to influence the things that we teach, the things that we believe, what we know the Bible says is correct, and we can try to help them. So it's not that you love someone and you bring them in and you accept everything they do. It's lovingly guiding them to the right way.
Yeah. And again, if someone doesn't want to listen, if someone isn't all with it, we don't tie them to a chair and beat them until they admit that our way is the right way. You wash your hands and you say, I wish you the best. I hope that in the future we can have more conversation about this. But just like Jesus didn't march through the town and force everyone to listen to his word, if someone really isn't going to listen, if someone really isn't going to receive what you're trying to give, go about your day. There are others who are willing to hear. There are others who will listen to what you have to say.
I like this passage that says, shake it up, from your feet.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Don't let anything linger from it. Just completely, it's a bummer, this didn't work out, but move on completely. Let them go about their business. And maybe just that act of not getting that last little shot in, that act of completely moving along is enough to make them question, maybe I should hear what those do.
And let yourself be an example.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's good that, yeah, we talk about teaching the Bible, because the last little point here I want to, as we wrap up our class, I want to talk about spiritual development and spiritual growth. We, obviously, why are we in this building? Why am I up here rambling in front of y'all?
Because we want to be together in God's name.
Because we want to be together. And what are we called to do? Encourage one another to learn.
Spur each other on.
We can come together and sing songs to the Lord. That's worship. But as Paul teaches, as almost every letter that we hear, it calls us, we need to learn. To study to show thyself approved, yes. Wonderful, yeah, little sentence there. We should never be satisfied. We should never be comfortable with where we are in our studies. One thing that I have appreciated so much about coming to this church and listening to Baxter speak is Baxter in his lessons. I'm gonna, I don't know, shower him with praise for a few seconds. Baxter, what he brings to his sermons is not just what the words say. Baxter doesn't read the words and then tell you again what the words say, and then maybe give you a different way that the words are said. Baxter talks to us about what the words mean. Where did the words come from? What language are these words from? And also, what historically could cause those words to be written? Why does Paul write in this way to the church in Ephesus? Why does the first sermon series, when we moved here, almost, what is it now, like 3.5, 4 years? When we moved here a while ago, the first sermon series was John's letters to the churches in Revelation. And every single letter we studied, Baxter talked about, here's what was happening historically when this city received this letter. And it directly correlated with what Paul was telling that church. And so, yes, as we do our studies, it's good to read the entire Bible. It's good to have the daily Bible verse that you read, but we need to dive in deeper. As it infuriating, my English teacher would always say, we don't want surface answers. We don't want surface reading. We want deep answers. We want to get into the meat of it. Starting out, yes, we have to know what the words say and what the context is, but as we read them further and further, we need to not be okay with just, that's what the words say. We want to look at the Bible in every possible aspect. The minute that we think we have the Bible all figured out is when we're wrong. Because the Bible is our guide, but our human perception of words written in a book are very limited. And so that's why we have to look at it from every angle, from every aspect, from every viewpoint. Sometimes the viewpoint that we listen to might not be entirely correct, but because you were able to stop and compare it and identify, here's what's wrong with that viewpoint, we have gained a deeper understanding of the Bible. So just as James and John changed the way they viewed life, human life, they were willing to end human lives because they wouldn't listen to Jesus. And that goes from that point to John writing his letters to the churches across the country saying, the most important thing is showing another person love. And so let us want in the same way to understand Jesus' teachings the same way that James and John came to do. And with that, I think we'll end class. Thank you all for a wonderful class.